Welcome back to the channel. So, this is follow-on from one of my videos I did, which didn't get too many views. I hate to think it was probably because there was a negative connotation around it. Basically, it was me shitting on rugby union and its growth strategy and how it should go about growing the game. So, in a different spin, to see if positivity really is taking the internet back, I'm going to offer some ways for rugby to grow the game, to get larger.
It's so big. It's so big.
And the strategies that I think rugby could use to grow. I realise I've just said that in basically two different ways. So without any further ado, let's get straight into this mother. So this is one of the first things that I think rugby needs to do. And I'm specifically talking from an English rugby fan point of view and how that can be grown. And I'm sure there are similarities that you can do, that you can use here and put in other domestic rugby leagues, right? And I think one of the big things is, if you look at the highlight show that you have for Premiership highlights, it's on the wrong place, it's on the wrong channel, it's at the wrong time, and it's just never going to be successful. So at the moment we have a highlight show, 5:30 every Sunday, and it's on TNT Sports. This is on a paid TV channel. It's a Sunday evening when a lot of people are probably busy doing other things. I also think there's a lot of translation, especially in the UK, in terms of rugby fans and American football fans. So once the rugby games are over, they're probably wanting to watch the American football that's later on in the evening. So it clashes with that a little bit as well. So that's not so good. I think if they were to reschedule this program and put it in a different place at a different time, I think they need to almost risk losing money on the show just to get exposure. And they need to put it pre-match the day. And if they can't get it at BBC, then they need to do it on ITV. It needs to be on a free channel where people can watch it for free. And the importance of having it before match the day is because people are not going to watch it at the same time, but they can use it as a lead on before it goes on to the next show. A lot of shows have had a lot of success by this, by either being at the beginning or at the tail end of a really, really popular show. Match of the Day is obviously sports. It is the UK's highlight football show. It is Premier. It must get like well, it is the Premier League, but it's also Premier in its quality, and it has a huge viewer count. If you can get that slot prior to it being aired, perfect. And you've got to have it on terrestrial TV. You cannot have it in a paid subscription service when you're trying to grow the game. Advertise this show, get it out there. You need to operate this advertising at a loss for a little bit before we can start making money off of it. That's just, you need to just grow the crowd. And to grow the crowd, you need to invest in doing that. And this is a great way of doing it. This highlight show as well, it needs to cover all kind of domestic rugby leagues, not just the Premiership, in some regard or fashion. It can't just cover just the Premiership. It's too nebulous.
It's nebulous.
It doesn't show how it builds into the wider picture of international rugby, which is obviously the biggest claw for eyes. It needs to feed into that relationship and that atmosphere. It needs to show the significance of international rugby and also the finals of certain leagues. It needs to build towards something. It can't just be, here's a highlight, this is what we thought of it. Like, it needs to have the story and the narrative built of the teams, the players, and everything like that. And you need to have great people in doing that. I would probably pay for talent to do this at a significant level. Who that would be, not 100% sure. There's no one that really comes rushing to mind. I'd love to know your thoughts about who that is, who that could be, who that should be. And yeah, that's what the show needs to be about. Another thing that I think rugby needs to do is sending athletes as ambassadors to other sports and TV channels. I think Rugby League has started doing this. I think American football did do this. And this is a great way to introduce the sport to fans that are fans of other sports, because I think that sports has a lot of translatability in terms of its fan bases, in terms of you're more than likely to get someone who's a fan of another sport to become a fan of another sport rather than someone who's just not a fan of a sport, period. I think the exception to this rule is probably the Drive to Survive documentary. Got a lot of casual fans in through that way. And maybe rugby needs to look at something like that in the future. And maybe we'll talk about that in another bullet point. But in terms of trying to get other sports fans related into the sport, you need to send ambassadors. You need to send them to other parts of the world. You need to send them to like America, to American football. You need to send them to any other kind of contact sports that are around the world. And you need to kind of get that buy-in, you know, go throughout Europe. At the moment, we've got, like 2 countries, maybe 3 or 4, you could argue, that take rugby kind of like in a serious way. You need to grow that. There's a huge population and a huge ability to do that. So that's another thing. Building off that point, to allow ambassadors to have time off to go and do these things, I think there actually needs to just be an off season for rugby, period. At the moment, we have basically every single weekend, and I'm just talking about the men's game here, I'm sure it's probably similar to the women's as well. There is a game every single weekend that is either like a top domestic league, or it's a European league, or it's a New Zealand Super Rugby with Australia, or it's international season. There's always a game every weekend. Like, there's no downtime. Rugby and World Rugby needs to reduce the league size down, reduce the competitions down, and we need to have, I think, a dedicated 2 months of complete off-season of all rugby across the world. Now, there's a few reasons for this. One was the ambassadors. It feeds into that earlier bullet point that I just made. But I think it stops burnout from the sport. I think a lot of people can probably watch it for a few weeks, but then when it comes around and you've just finished your domestic league, it's like, well, now we have, you know, the rugby championship, or now we have this, now we have that, and there's always rugby to never like lose track of, right? There are some fans that absolutely love this, they'll love it, they'll always be there watching every weekend, but I think for a lot of fans, you cause burnout. There's no defined set point of like, this is when the season starts, this is when it ends. It's something that I really enjoy about watching American football and the F1 as well, which are other sports that I like to enjoy and watch, is the fact that there's a defined period where that starts and when it finishes. And it's quite nice as a casual fan to mean that I don't have to feel like I need to be tuned in every single week to know what's going on and keep up to date in those sports. That's really, really good, and I think it's understated. Other thing as well is I think it will reduce injuries in the sport as well. Yes, we do have the domestic leagues of Super Rugby, and obviously the European leagues kind of separated out by timescales, but usually those international players, after they're done with their domestic leagues, they roll right onto their international competitions. So, for example, the European leagues, you have the autumn internationals, where all the international players go straight into that, and then they go straight back into domestic. Usually they're given like a grace period of like a week or something like that before they're thrown straight back into the action. Same deal with the Six Nations. And then at the end of that, there's probably like a summer tour or something like that. Meaning next year we've got the British and Irish Lions. So there's no break for the players after that. And then, you know, you look at the other side of the coin and like Super Rugby, they're in a bit of an off season at the moment when they've literally just had the Rugby Championship, and they're going to have some time off now until they have their domestic league. But there are also autumn internationals, so it means just after a very intensive international competition, they've got, what is it, like, we've got a month from now, so you've got just over a month until you're like doing another world tour across the world. And I know it's probably for each team 3 or 4 games at maximum, but like, it's a huge amount of travel. Like, you're traveling to a lot of different countries, playing very, very competitive international games. Yes, the Southern Hemisphere is better than the Northern. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying that more than likely a lot of these games are going to come down to like 1 scores. There'll be arm wrestles of games. Like, this is going to take a physical toll on the players. I think rugby would massively, massively benefit from just having 2 months of the year just dedicated to no professional rugby whatsoever. And it's for all those reasons. Build the hype. Have it like as an area where there's like transfers going on in terms of talks of teams and stuff. I think it just gives everyone, not only like the players, a physical reset, it gives everyone a mental reset from the sport itself. And I think we don't see the benefit of that because we don't have it at the moment. So let me know what you think, if you agree with that or not. Another point as well, and I think this has maybe got to come in a little bit later as another point, but international games. We have seen some tours where, for example, Ireland play New Zealand in America, but I think in an effort to try and have a more global game, we need to have international games played in countries where rugby is promising, that it has, you know, potential to get better and more popular. I'm thinking, for example, why can't we have some of these autumn international games in, like, say, like Portugal or Georgia? I mean, Georgia's a more of established rugby country, and I know Portugal's gotten better and better, but you know what I mean? Like, these are countries that are kind of on that doorstep of trying to get into the more top levels of rugby. You know, maybe having this and having the ability for tickets to be bought for these games. And maybe, you know, we don't try to maximize profits on this. Maybe we sell the tickets at reasonable prices and we really hammer the advertising and the marketing correctly, rather than just, you know, I think the problem is if you ask World Rugby to do this kind of thing, then the advertising will be poor. There'll be lack of interest. People won't even know it's happening until the last minute. The marketing and the advertising needs to be, you know, it needs to be sold to the public that it's going to in a major way. We're talking about, again, build up on sports shows in the country that they're in terms of like the importances of the games, these teams' records, where they are in the world rankings, history between these two teams, who the best players are, what they're building for in terms of a World Cup or a Lions Tour, introduce what the Lions Tour is, stuff like that. Like, these are all things that need to happen, right? You need to get the marketing right for these things to be a success. I think maybe some of the reasons why these international games haven't happened as much is because when they tried them, they were like, oh, well, these don't really work. But I think if you put some actual like elbow grease into them, they'll probably work correctly. So that is another thought that I've had in terms of growing the game. I also think this Nations League, or whatever they're calling it, in terms of a competition that we have for internationals, maybe we just scrap this and maybe in the existing competitions like the Rugby Championship or the Six Nations, I think they should probably expand each of these competitions by maybe like one nation, and there's like a promotion and relegation kind of situation with those competitions with just one team. Because I don't think it's fair that we have the Six Nations, and the Six Nations I think has never been stronger. I think Italy are now a very competitive side that they get that they are at risk of relegation if you put like just the bottom team gets knocked out at the end of it. Same deal with Argentina or Australia, probably more in the case of the most recent Rugby Championship. Add in another slot for another team and have the next ranked team that's relevant for that area put into the competition, and then at the end of each competition maybe have one regulation. I just think there needs to be, if it's not that system, there needs to be more of a system of tier 2 nations and below, to have a system of being able to play these tier 1 nations more regularly. And I think if you allow that, and if you have that, then there's more chances of these, you know, these international teams becoming more of a big deal, and the World Cup being more competitive, as I think it's in desperate need of, which it was shown, I think, in the France World Cup for sure. That's it. I thought I had more ideas, but I think that's a good starting point. Maybe we could revisit some of these in the future. Maybe I can add to what I think in the future if I come up with anything else. But let me know what you think in the comments. I genuinely just trying to grow the game, not trying to like shit on it from a great height. And yeah, that's generally what my intentions are with this. So hope you are enjoying rugby wherever you are.